Hi everybody. Today we are going to be talking about 3.6, which is adding and subtracting decimals. The first thing I want to show you is in your book so that you can see the base 10 pieces. You used these probably when you were very young to represent hundreds and tens. Right now we are going to see this blue piece as one whole. However, you can see that it's sectioned off into 100 little pieces, and each little piece or strip of that, like this red piece, represents a tenth. These little green guys represent hundredths, so those are like dimes and these are like pennies. So I'm going to show you with a model how this all works so you can see how it works in your head before we move on to the algorithm or the arithmetic with the numbers. So if we have 1.15 plus 0.95, so that's 1 and 15 hundredths plus 95 hundredths, we would get out 1 whole, 1 tenth, and 5 hundredths to represent 1.15, and we do 9 tenths and 5 hundredths to represent the 95 hundredths. When you combine the pieces, so you put the red ones together, you still have 1 whole, but now you have just made 10 out of the tenths, and you have made 10 ones if you group those together. So just like you regroup when you have addition, what it becomes is you trade these 10 in for 2 wholes, and you trade these little hundredths into 1 red tenth. So when a question might ask you to find the base 10 pieces, I am completely fine if you just draw a square, a rod, and little dots to represent the base 10 pieces, because the reason I'm not doing them with in my notes is because you know me and drawing, and my lines aren't straight, and then there's never 10 of them. So I wanted to show you the model of how this works. And then we are going to go through, and I think most of you are really ready for going through how adding and subtracting decimals really works. So on your notes, if you feel like you don't understand the base 10 example, and you want to draw a picture if needed, and you want to draw the squares equal 1, and I'll draw it like this, the strip equals 0.1, and then the dot equals 0.01. So if you were saying 1.35, that would be 1 and 35 hundredths. The basic rule we are going to talk about in adding and subtracting decimals is you always line up the decimal. When you're adding, this is an and, subtracting. Always. If your decimal is not lined up, it will not work out. So if you see a question that reads 9.8 plus 2.12, how that works is you do 9.8, and then I added this cows come home 0 and 2.12. So you just add this as you would normally. So you should get 11 and 92 hundredths, or 11.92. It gets a little trickier for kids when you see the number 8 minus 165, and see it as $8 minus $1.65. So that makes these cows come home zeros rather easy to picture in your head. So I put my 2 cows come home zeros, I lined up my decimal points, and now I'm ready to go. I just subtract as normal. Don't forget this decimal down here, or you will end up with a number that is way too big. So right here, I can't borrow from this guy because he's already a 0, so I'm going to make him a 10, him a 7, and then this guy still needs 1, so this will go down to a 9 because I need a 10 right here. And 10 minus 5 is 5, 9 minus 6 is 3, 7 minus 1 is 6. Notice if you don't put the 0 there, you ended up with $8 minus 165 would equal $635. That doesn't even make sense. So make sure you add that decimal point in at the very end. If you're wondering, oh, did I do that right? Especially when you're dealing with the zeros, you can take 635 and add it to 165, and you should end up with the $8 you started with. So you work the problem backwards. It's called checking your work if you need to check it. The other piece that I wanted to show you, and I'm going to show you in the book because I think they have these nice little, I don't know, they do these little triangle things that I think makes it more seeable. If you are listing some prices, like $1.30, $1.20, $1.20, and $3.70, they rearranged the group so that these two together equal $5, and then this is $2.40. So it was really easy to regroup them to a $7.40 so that you can see the final answer more, and you don't have to do all that mental regrouping in your head. Okay, we are going to go through a concept. One thing you will be asked to do is substitute for an x. You just put a number in for x. I'm not going to go through that because you guys do so well in your algebra that I don't think it's worth noting. You'll know what to do when you get to those questions. We are going to do this key concept that has the commutative property and the associative property. These are hard to remember, but my classes from previous years have said, Mrs. McKinley, we love your little pictures, even though they're not so great. We'll always remember them. So the commutative property, if you think of a parent commuting into work in the morning, they're driving in a car, sometimes a bus, but we're going to use a car. The commutative property is the driving around property. Your little numbers are going to drive around the math problem. So what that means in addition is that you can drive your numbers and switch them around. You can do 2 plus 5 or 5 plus 2. It doesn't matter. You're going to come up with the same either way. The algebra that you will see is that A plus B equals B plus A. You could add a C in there. You could do A plus B plus C equals B plus A plus C, or C plus B plus A. It doesn't matter what order that you add them in. They can drive all around when they're an addition signed. So that's the commutative property. You'll have to be able to identify what the numbers did and distinguish between the commutative property and now the associative property. And notice that there's two S's in here. And how you can remember the associative property is these are like parentheses that have been packed in a suitcase. They're all wrinkled. And so you take your little wrinkled S's and you shake them out and make them into parentheses. You get your parentheses out. That'll help you remember the difference between the commutative and the associative properties. The associative properties, you kind of know this concept in your head, but you didn't know it had a name. Basically, the value of a sum does not depend on the grouping symbols or how they are grouped with the parentheses. So if you have 2 plus 5 plus 4, you can put the parentheses here, and it's the same as doing 2 plus 5 plus 4 and putting the parentheses here. So this would be 7 plus 4 is 11, or 2 plus 9 is 11. Doesn't matter which way you do that. The algebraic way to say this is A plus B plus C, and with the A and B in parentheses, is the same as A plus B plus C with the B and C in parentheses. Why, you ask, would you ever need to know this? Well, you do this in your head all the day long with real numbers. I am going to show you the book examples because I feel like it really makes more sense when you see what you are doing. So on a quiz or a test, you're going to have to be able to distinguish whether the commutative or associative property are used. It's pretty common that anytime you see a grouping symbol, but not always, because if they drive around, then you use the associative property. If you notice in B, all that has changed is that you've moved the parentheses to over here. Why would you do that? Well, in my head, I see that 10 plus 7 is 17, and then I'll tack on that 3 plus 5 afterwards. That makes more sense in my head to group it that way. In this one, we have 4 plus 2.75 plus 11. I would actually drive the 4 over by the 11 like they did, so I would do 11 plus 4 is 15, and then tack on the 2.75. Basically, it makes it a lot easier to do things like mental math if you are using these properties. Right now, in 4th grade, we want you to know the name of what you're doing. There are some questions down here. If you want to take a look at them, they are in your book if you want to give them a try and see if you come up with the same answers that the book does. The question in number 5 and number 6 read much like the quiz question that you will see coming up. You'll need to be able to tell whether it's a commutative or associative property. They'll have those two properties listed and you'll have to be able to identify them. You'll see the math assignment below. Please do your corrections, do the math assignment, and see me if you have any questions.